My goal is to give everybody here a crash course in addiction neuroscience. I want everyone today to have a sense of what it's like when I talk to a person. And it's a very peculiar experience. By the time you're done, you'll think, oh wow, that must be weird to be him. Because when I meet a person, I use two hands. One of the things, I did some research on LifeRing before I prepared this presentation. One of the things at the end of a LifeRing talk is everybody claps, right? Isn't that one of the nice things, celebratory thing? It's lovely. So when I tell patients how I see their situation, I mentioned two ways, and I'm going to use two hands as a metaphor. I'm going to give a lot of metaphors today because it's going to help your recovery. It's going to help you understand addiction. It's going to help you understand the addiction of a family member if you understand how this thing between your ears works. The more you understand how this thing between your ears works, the better you're going to roll through your recovery and understand other people. That's 2016 neuroscience. It's going to be 2026 neuroscience. One of the nice things about a secular organization is I can talk about addiction with no reference to supernatural concepts. Don't need any. I can talk about neuroscience, biology. It's kind of nice. I can't talk about things like the afterlife, but I can talk about addiction without any reference to supernatural concepts. Because we're a species who have this collection of cells between our ears that gets hooked by molecules and does funny stuff. How's that for a definition of addiction? It's based in biology. So when I talk to a person, what's your name?
Dan.
Dan. When I talk to Dan, say he comes into lasting recovery or anywhere. Actually, let's say he comes into lasting recovery because I don't do this when I talk to people in public. When he comes into lasting recovery, I'm thinking about Dan as a person. And people, and by the way, if I use the term addict, slap my hand, I like people terms, a person with a substance use disorder. If he's a person with a substance use disorder, I'm going to think of him as a person who has a mom and a dad and has a family and has had some hard times and may have some goals and can feel pain like I do. He's a person. But here's the weird part. Here's what you're going to walk out of here understanding better today. He's also an evolved organism that has a specific kind of biology that I've spent the last 25 years of my life obsessively learning about. And that perspective of him as a biological organism is going to influence how I think about him. It's going to and when I'm talking to someone with a substance use disorder, that understanding, which I hope mine is a little better than all of yours because that's what I do for a living. That understanding is going to influence the treatments I'm going to recommend and how I think about his disorder and how I think about his choices, et cetera, et cetera. How could it not? If I'm an architect, which I'm not, I'm looking at this room and thinking, they did this thing with the. Okay? So the other hand, on one hand, although I'm a scientist and think of myself as such, I'm a human being like everybody. I have a mom and a dad and feel pain and all that good stuff. But then on the other hand, like I said, I've been obsessively interested in biology, and more specifically brain biology for the last 25 years. And I'm a big believer in education and neuroscience as taking massive leaps forward in our understanding of addiction. There's some downsides to it, but we'll get to that. So as we get started, here's our journey with Sisyphus. Sisyphus is this guy, his punishment was, he got in great shape with the punishment, right? That's not bad. But addiction is a hard problem. Humans have some easy problems, humans have some hard problems. If you have a skin tag, it's an easy problem. I clip it off, you're done. Not a recurrent problem. Addiction is a hard problem. Kills tons of people, wrecks lives, take moms away from kids. It's a real hard problem. I don't think anybody debates that. Anybody believe addiction's an easy problem? In any audience, anywhere, I want them to call me or email me and tell me how easy it is. It's a hard problem, no matter which end of it you're on. This is René Descartes. You can change his last name into a kind of thinking called Cartesian dualism. That's a fancy word, but what it means is there's like two kinds of stuff. René Descartes wanted to figure out how the world worked, so he went into a dark room and he sat there and there was no input because he wanted to know like how this deal works. And what he realized is if you cut everything else off, there's still this thinking going on. And he said, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. So there's two kinds of things in Descartes' world. There's like my mind, which is and then there's the rest of this stuff. But that perspective is actually wrong. I'm going to tell you why, and this gets kind of a little heady. So that was wrong. Has anybody heard? Who's heard the statement, addiction is a brain disorder? Please, if your hand doesn't go up, then because this has been said since 1976 when Leshner said, addiction's a brain disorder. When I started this talk, when you actually dive into some questions, I didn't actually really understand what that means. What does it mean that addiction is a brain disorder? That I can do a liver transplant or a kidney transplant or a toe transplant. I don't know why you do that. And the addiction stays with the brain. But if I could do a brain transplant, and we probably never will for reasons beyond this talk, the addiction would go with the brain. I promise. That's the way the world works. So I hope everybody leaves today with with some tools for thinking about this idea that addiction is a brain disorder. Rocks don't get addiction. Rats do. Rats have brains, rocks don't. Addiction's a brain disorder. Now, black and white photography is interesting. It's called black and white photography. And you can do some spectacular things with black and white photography. But if you actually, drill down into black and white photography, there's a lot of gray here. And so even things that are black and white have some gray in between. But if we take the brain and we push it through a prism, I want to talk about some rainbow concepts. Because as Jeff said, it's impossible that in 2020 and in 2030, Sweden's a very secular country, that a coherent discussion about addiction is going to be around supernatural concepts, like God. That's just it's not conceivable that in an increasingly secular world, that's going to be a turning point for a rational discussion about this brain disorder. So we're going to talk about some colors in the brain, because when you say addiction's a brain disorder, that's kind of a black and white statement. Someone else could say, no, it's not. Right? So it's either is or it isn't. That's a black and white statement. I'm going to talk about, hopefully give you some tools to think about how to make sense of the fact that addiction is a brain disorder. So here's 7 tools for thinking like a shrink. Now, when I'm talking about tools, we actually have cognitive tools. Words are cognitive tools. They help you wrap your mind around an idea. It's a very powerful thing, cognitive tool. So I'm going to give these tools names. I'm going to repeat them 3 times, and hopefully you'll walk out remembering one thing I said. The first tool I call one-hand clapping. Second, there's an issue of levels and complexity. Third, your brain is like an iceberg. Fourth, your brain is made of modules and circuits. Fifth, your brain is both plastic, that means malleable, and static, that means you have memory. Sixth, we're all dogs, and I'm going to tell you what that means. If there's any dog lovers, this is going to make you smile. I love dogs because they're a great analogy for teaching us about human mammals. And seventh, boy, that turned out terrible. I should pick a better font next time. This is Roy G. Biv if you're paying attention, if you're a rainbow person. That's indigo, but it turns out awful. So that says models and language matter. We have brains where the way we use words is a big deal. It really influences how we understand things. That's why calling someone an addict feels different than if I say you're a person with a substance use disorder. They feel different. If we call torture enhanced interrogation, it feels different, right? George Orwell talked about the fact that governments co-opt words to change the way that people think in the world.